talking about a law last weekend that they tried to put forth in Florida where it was basically if a kid puts up even a picture of a Pop-Tart not into the shape of a gun, you were arrested, your parents were arrested, jail time, fines, to a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, doesn't even matter, arrest. And as egregious and as insane as that sounds, this kid brought a Nerf gun to school. A Nerf gun. This kid brought a Nerf gun and was suspended. And it's mind-boggling.
Well, isn't it interesting that we want to arrest middle school kids for wearing the wrong T-shirt and refusing to take it off, or for daring to, in a historical reenactment, with the teacher's permission, bringing a fake gun to school? But here's the irony. The same people who are saying that are saying that you can never arrest illegal immigrants, even if they're violent and they have a record.
Yeah.
You can't arrest and detain illegal immigrants who are child molesters. You are allowed to bring drag queens who are also pedophiles to read books to 5-year-olds in Houston libraries, but heaven forbid you if you bring a Nerf gun to a public school. It's completely ass backwards.
Yes, and when they do these zero policies, these zero tolerance policies, and that's what's ushered this in, this deprives us of justice and mercy. It deprives us of the basis of our legal system, which is each case on its own merit, weighed out between justice and mercy. All this is justice. We might as well have Sharia law. If they go to the extreme of zero tolerance on everything, they're penalizing like this, and they're honestly penalizing with bias, because I think if you were Muslim and you were trying to do something different with that display, I don't think it would have been touched. But we don't even understand that the schools themselves, the ones that are supposed to be teaching kids about these things, have absolutely deprived these kids who are American citizens of justice and mercy, of our entire legal system when they make these decisions and policies.
Yeah, zero tolerance policies are ridiculous on their basis. They do away with the entire process of mitigation.
It's one size fits all. You're doomed. You're done. That's not what we want. I don't want a system like that. I would move to the Middle East if I wanted a system like that.
Well, they even take it further, though. Zero tolerance is also guilty as charged.
Yeah.
There's no trial involved.
Yeah, exactly. This is so out of hand. That manipulation and control. Mm-hmm. We have let these millennials rule the roost.
Everyone scrambles to the side, and then it flips completely over, plunging everyone into the water. None of the passengers were wearing life jackets. Watched as children and adults struggled in the water. Most of them couldn't swim. The fast current swept some of them miles downstream. Men and boys who could swim jumped into the water from the shore and bridges to try to save people.
The Muslim call to prayer was broadcast nationwide 1 week after 50 people were shot to death and dozens wounded.
Meanwhile, Houston, Galveston, and Brazoria counties are all under an air quality alert this morning. The TCEQ has issued an ozone action day saying people in sensitive groups may have some trouble today. They say an increase in incoming ozone background levels and a departing cold front combined with sunshine today and light winds have led them to issue the alert. Texas prison officials say putting air conditioning in the state's correctional facilities would cost more than $1 billion.
Iowa resident Rhonda Masseth lost her home in the town of Missouri Valley. It's near the Missouri River, Iowa's border with Nebraska.
We're gonna leave. I can't live here. I can't do this again next year.
There are warnings downstream for St. Joseph, Missouri. U.S. weather experts say this spring's flooding will continue to be catastrophic for the Midwest. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration warns as many as 200 million people could be at risk for flooding.
Federal and state agencies are testing water in the area for possible chemical contamination. HPD's faced criticism over its use of those raids since the deadly Harding Street raid in January that left 2 people dead and several officers injured. Acevedo told the city's Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee this week the raids won't be going away completely, but that the Narcotics Division will have to get approval from his office before having a judge sign off on the warrant.
You don't want to eliminate them completely because there are instances where the no-knock warrant tactic is actually probably the safest for everyone involved in terms of the execution of that warrant. But you want to make sure that you're judicious, you're thoughtful, and that you're limited.
Acevedo said only SWAT teams will be used to conduct the raids, and teams will have to not training to use ballistic shields during rain.
But in the past, the Taliban and other insurgent groups have mounted attacks on foreign troops based in Afghanistan.
4 American soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan this year. In Iraq, there are calls for the governor of Mosul to resign following the deaths of more than 90 people.
The reason that the officer drew his weapon, so in other words, what happened before he drew his weapon, was not at issue. The most important parts of it were actually what happened when his gun came out and what was he dealing with while his gun was out.
He says more than 400 U.S. law enforcement agencies have already adopted or are testing Meridian's gun-mounted cameras, including about 50 here in Texas.
North London has been jailed for at least 23 years. Budding actor Nation Eastbrand was hunted down by youths on bicycles near his parents' home in Islington and stabbed to death. 19-year-old Jack Stevens, who coordinated the attack, fled to Spain but was extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of the murder following a trial at the Old Bailey and was jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years. Detectives investigating the fatal stabbing of 17-year-old Jodie Chesney in East London at the start of this month made a further arrest. Police say a 17-year-old boy was detained this morning on suspicion of murder. 3 others, aged 16, 18 and 20, have been charged with murder.
The former IRA bomber has named the people who he believes were responsible for the pub bombings in the English city of Birmingham in 1974. Muslim countries meeting in emergency session in Istanbul have called for measures to be taken to tackle Islamophobia globally. Authorities in Cameroon say kidnappers have released a football team kidnapped on Wednesday from the University of Ouya. The ransom is reportedly being paid for their release.
I think what's very important is that leadership and people and communities get together to divide them.
Those two problems? Retired Army Brigadier General William Gothard of Fayetteville, North Carolina, has both. He says his 36 years of service have left him with hearing loss in both ears and a maddening condition called tinnitus.
The Pentagon says 2 U.S. service personnel have been killed in Afghanistan while they were participating in a military operation today. Their names have not been disclosed as the Defense Department notifies their next of kin first. The Pentagon also didn't say where the deaths occurred or say who the troops were fighting. A spokesman for NATO says the matter is under investigation.
State Senator Jose Menendez, a San Antonio Democrat, filed a bill this session that would allow doctors to prescribe medical marijuana that contains higher percentages of THC, the psychoactive component of the plant. Also, patients on the state registry would be able to grow a few marijuana plants in their home.
Oh, we still have these problems on the go, Jeff, for the 401 westbound collectors at Yonge Street. They are closed for an ongoing police investigation. Also, the Yonge Street on-ramps to the westbound 401 are closed off.
Yale has now rescinded the admission of one student caught up in the college entrance scam scandal.
Court documents say that former Yale women's soccer coach Rudy Meredith accepted bribes in exchange for designating certain incoming students as recruits on the soccer team, easing the way for their admission to the university. In one case, an applicant's parents paid $1.2 million to have their daughter recruited to the soccer team.
Amid a row over allegations the Sackler family has helped fuel America's opioid crisis, the Sackler Trust has suspended new charitable donations in the UK.
Facing charges for allegedly stealing from a church, 24-year-old Aaron Davis of Walnut Hill arrested last week for stealing equipment from the Cokesbury United Methodist Church on North 9th Avenue. He allegedly stole 5 pieces of audio equipment valued at $2,400, then pawned them for just $375.
We all today, on our cell phones, we have access to the Library of Alexandria walking around in our pockets every single day. But yet the hardest thing to find these days is the truth.
2 weeks ago, longer-range rockets again, but this is the furthest that a rocket has reached inside Israel.
Charities say the government's proposed knife crime prevention orders will put vulnerable children at risk. Parliament will debate measures including curfews and social media bans for kids as young as 12. Pippa Goodfellow is from the Standing Committee for Youth Justice.
Many of these young people are being coerced into criminal activity or gang involvement by adults who are exploiting their vulnerability. So punitive sanctions and the threat of prison is not going to make these children feel safe or protect them, and it's unlikely to discourage them from carrying a knife.
Driver now facing DUI charges after a crash in California.
The Greyhound bus was en route from Seattle to L.A. There were 35 passengers on board. After making stops in Sacramento and Fresno, passengers say the driver appeared to be fighting to stay awake while he was driving. Jose Gonzalez was on board.
I just saw the bus go in a swerving, from left to right, and I thought we were going down a hill or something.
On Highway 99, the bus hit an embankment. The driver, 28-year-old Ashton Castillo, was arrested on suspicion of DUI and driving without a license. Los Angeles.
When it comes to story time for toddlers, looks like books are better than tablets. New study just out says young children engage more when a parent reads aloud from a printed book rather than a tablet.
Yeah, no kidding. And but I will tell you that Democrats have already ordered you to believe that there's not a problem. So,
amen to that. By the way, isn't that strawberry profiling, though, these special kind with meth in them and stuff like that?
Yeah,
you should just assume they're normal strawberries.
They should start suing because now I'm not going to buy strawberries today.
Can't believe that. Wow. And they're the frozen kind of strawberries, too, though, now. They're not,
Oh, well, the ones in the bag in the frozen food section then don't buy those, but you can still buy the fresh.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Roger
watch
that.
out for those.
See, right when you walk into the store, you start strawberry profiling. You go, I don't want them frozen kind. They're full of meth. I want the normal, regular, fresh strawberries there now. And, by the way, more than half of all illegal immigrants arrested at the Canadian border. Kurt?
Well, yeah. Now, we're usually talking about the southern border, but this one, the headline comes and talks about the U.S.-Canada border, and they say more than half of the ones arrested there are from Mexico.
The Mexican government says it lost about $3.5 billion to stolen gasoline last year. That's $9 million a day. There, drug cartels are tapping gasoline pipelines and stealing gas straight from oil refineries. So the new president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, decided to cut the cartels off from gasoline.
He is a fearless man. I have to give him that. He's really fearless.
This is Manuel Molano. He's an economist in Mexico with the Mexican Institute for Competitiveness. The president of Mexico shut down the gasoline pipelines that run through the country. So even if the cartels punched a hole in one, there'd be no gas in there for them to steal. And he sent the military to guard the refineries. This is when a message written on a blanket appeared hanging off a bridge in the state of Guanajuato.
This is what we usually call a narcomanta.
A drug trafficker's blanket.
They usually send messages like this.
They write messages on blankets?
Yes, and they hang them in cities with very foul language and terrible spelling.
This blanket said, President of Mexico, get your military and federal police out of this state, away from the refinery. If not, I'm going to start killing innocent people. It was signed by a wanted criminal called El Marro, the Hammer. Stealing gasoline is so lucrative that Ian Ralby says it's happening in almost every country. Ralby fights maritime fuel smuggling for the United Nations, which basically means he fights pirates.
I would say yes. I fight pirates, smugglers, traffickers, and thieves.
Ralby says one of Mexico's most notorious drug cartels is selling stolen gas to other countries. They have fake export certificates and an entire fleet of ships in the sea.
They have tankers, they have supply vessels, they have support vessels.
How can you sell stolen fuel smuggled out of Mexico to, like, Thailand?
Well, if you probably wouldn't sell it to Thailand because they're smuggling it in via fishing boats from Malaysia and then selling it in Coke bottles on the street. So Thailand's got itself its own dynamic.
Criminals are incredibly creative. Ralby says governments who are trying to prevent fuel theft have to constantly change their strategy. Take Morocco and Algeria. The two countries have a closed border. People cannot cross the border at all. But donkeys can.
And as a result, donkeys have been taking overnight jerry cans with Algerian fuel across the border into Morocco for years.
Like trained donkeys traveling alone through the mountains.
And if you think that's just a small-scale thing, the total adds up to about $2 billion a year by donkey in jerry cans.
In Mexico, Molano says more gasoline is now getting to gas stations by tanker trucks instead of pipeline.
Best way to move liquids is through a pipe. The cheapest way.
It costs 14 times more to move gas by truck, according to the Mexican government. And Molano says cartels can steal a truck filled with gasoline, too.
This season begins by taking a look back at the war on crack in the 1980s, the people caught up in it, and how it helps us understand today's epidemic. Chrissy Clark is the host of The Uncertain Hour. Hi, Chrissy.
Thanks, Sabri.
So why did it make sense to start with the crack epidemic for this season?
To really understand the successes and failures of how we've handled opioids so far, you kind of need to go back 30 years to when we waged war on this very different drug, crack. And yet you don't hear a lot about whatever happened to that drug crisis. And so I started wondering, what did ever happen to crack? How do drug epidemics ever end? And so we start with this historical look at the rise and fall of the crack epidemic and then turn to what it can tell us about where we are and where we should be going to help reduce the harm of the opioid crisis today.
You know, I never thought about it, but you're right. It's not like there was some big announcement that, hey, we're done with crack now. So what did you find out about how the crack epidemic actually ended, if we can say it ended?
Right, and it's not like crack has entirely disappeared. There are some people who are still painfully struggling with addiction. But the national rates of crack use and abuse are much lower now than at their peak in the 1980s. And people who've spent decades studying this say it's mostly because crack pretty quickly developed a stigma for being a very intense drug that could do a lot of damage to people's lives. And so that scared away a lot of potential new users. I talked to a lot of people who grew up in communities surrounded by crack, and so many of them told me something along the lines of what David Magruder, who grew up in Washington, D.C., told me.
I never personally used crack. I always knew what it could do, and that was enough to deter me for a lifetime. I'm never doing it.
And in my research, I found that rates of new crack users were actually already going down by the late 80s, even as the war on crack was still revving up.
So bring this all home for us. What have we learned and what does this tell us about opioids today?
Well, the opioid crisis has been met with a less punitive approach, more oriented toward treatment rather than locking people up. And so maybe we've learned some lessons as a country around what happened with crack. But people who lived closest to the crack epidemic, many who are people of color, they have mixed feelings about that. Like, I'm glad we're figuring this out, but why wasn't that the approach 30 years ago with crack? And they also point out, even though the current opioid epidemic has more talk of addiction being a disease and not a moral failing, they say unless we put serious investment into treatment options and reforming the criminal justice system, then those lessons that were so hard learned from the crack epidemic might go to waste.
Once they take over the United States, they'll probably end up with the United States gold as well, which I believe will temporarily back their currency to lead to the prosperity. So right now, what do we see? Nations around the world accumulating gold, the United States acting like it's not so important. The time is going to come when the European beast power will rise up. Don't get overly caught up by U.S. dollars or by gold.
And you say you're 19, you're 17. How old are you right now?
19.
You're 19. So you dated a woman. Was she older than you?
And she was 37 and I was 13.
You're 13 dating a 37-year-old woman?
Yes.
That's rape.
But then I made the first move on her.
But it's still rape. That woman is too old to be dating you. You're underage.
I actually was older than I really am. So I told her I was 21 and she believed it.
She want to believe it. If you 13 years old, there's no way you look 21. You realize you were having sex with your mama, right?